Here we go, kinesiology 223. This is chapter 7. This chapter deals with or speaks about feedback, reinforcement, and intrinsic motivation. The main outcomes that we'll have for this chapter will be these 8 in your book on page 128. But we're looking at really the dynamic between positive and negative feedback and how a coach can influence that, right? In terms of you have to have positive, you have to have negative, and sometimes you have to just be able to bundle up that negative feedback, but do so in a positive manner. It sounds oxymoronic, but it's how it kind of works. You have types of punishment, you have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and there's ways that you can kind of motivate your athletes and kind of like really hone in on them to be able to help them with their own intrinsic motivation and basically kind of get them to be more self-aware to be able to leverage that to a greater degree. So let's talk about reinforcement. In the book, it's a combination of rewards or punishment, right? It could be positive or negative, and it's used to influence behavior. There's a type of behavior modification that we have as a coach. We have a desired outcome, and we use, whether it's a positive or negative type of reinforcement to be able to get that response. Now, you have to have a combination of both. You can't be exclusively positive or negative. There's no way, but most research will tell you that you want to be inherently more positive than negative. It's important to note that oftentimes you view this in terms of like the athlete-coach dynamic, but the positive and negative reinforcement can also come from other populations, like teammates, perhaps the game environment, perhaps just from other extrinsic or external type of factors. Now, what's interesting and what's challenging about this is, and I talked about several times already in presentations, is with reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, depending who is standing in front of you as an athlete, that athlete might be more responsive to negative feedback or negative reinforcement as opposed to positive reinforcement. Kind of depends on the person, their upbringing, etc., their coaching experiences they've had in the past, a whole myriad of different things. But you start to really hone in on who you can leverage in what way through positive or negative feedback. And with reinforcement, you start to look at it and go, okay, you're really trying to manipulate behavior. You're trying to have a particular behavior either be reinforced because it's correct and you want your athletes to continue to replicate that behavior, or you're trying to implement strategies to help reduce the likelihood of a behavior being done or done by an athlete. And really, you go back to like the variables in the experiment example that we had a couple chapters ago. Here you have a test population, you change the lights in the factory, in the Hawthorne factory, and all of a sudden productivity goes up. Here you have an athlete, and you try to do one little behavior modification, and quite frankly, you can't do like several of them at the same time because your athletes just can't process that amount of information or that amount of change. You have to be kind of precise and systematic, and well, to a certain degree, you have to be very understanding of how you can deliver either positive or negative reinforcement to your athletes to get the response that you want. So really, in terms of coaching, because this is kind of the art and science meeting once again, it's how you change one of the variables, and the variable being how you deliver positive or negative reinforcement to get the response that you want out of your athletes. Never exact, depending upon what you're trying to have or trying to accomplish. It could be something that could happen across the entire team, but usually there has to be little variations for each one of your athletes. Okay? One of the other challenges that you have, and I just want to point this out, and the book notes this, is that you have this behavior and you're in the coaching moment and one of your athletes does something amazing and you're like, Jimmy, do that again. And Jimmy can't replicate that again because it was an organic experience, it was a one-off, and you're trying to then reinforce a behavior that can't be replicated. And so therefore you can't further refine and offer positive reinforcement to that movement or activity, whatever it may be. So with influences, or ways to influence behavior, you have the two main types of reinforcement, which you've already hit on. You have positive, which you're trying to focus on rewarding an appropriate behavior, and then negative, where you're trying to have some kind of punishment to be able to reduce the likelihood of that behavior being repeated. Now, this is 100% in the line in the sand when I say this. It doesn't mean that a coach has to be inherently negative when delivering negative feedback or negative reinforcement. Quite honestly, it can be very much bundled up in a positive message. Jimmy, when you're shooting those free throws, you need to do this, this, and this. Try to stay away from doing this, this, and this, and you'll probably be more effective when you do it. Otherwise, you're doing a great job. You have to bundle in your negative reinforcement in between, almost like bookends or an Oreo cookie, and offer the negative stuff in between. But it's the negative stuff, fingers in quotes, that negative reinforcement that many times provides the very valuable coaching point that you're trying to deliver to your athlete to get them to have an increase in performance. Both are appropriate, both are fine, but as you're guiding your athletes along a path to become better athletes or become more or highly skilled in a particular functional area, you are going to need to deliver some negative reinforcement for behaviors. But it's how you deliver those and how you implement those that matter. Now with the book, I agree with this 100%. You need to have a ratio, and that ratio is a little bit different for each coach and how they implement and how they work with their athletes, whether you're a coach or physical therapist or maybe a football coach or strength and conditioning coach, or even in the corporatized environment. And the Positive Coaching Alliance, the PCA, has a little bit higher ratio, and that's because the PCA focuses almost exclusively on youth athletics. I was it was called dual goal coach, and I had that certification for a number of years when I coached youth athletics. But you're really trying to deliver and find more and more ways to deliver positive content, and even in the context of delivering negative reinforcement, still make it positive for your athletes. I would be completely remiss if I didn't point this out. If you'll notice the jerseys that these individuals are wearing when they're in a timeout, they have the Warhawk logo on it, and also you can see Whitewater over here on their shirt. This would be a picture somehow in this book that's from my beloved UW Whitewater athletic program. That's where I did my undergrad, and so I had to shine a light to this in the book. 131. All right, let's get back to it. Now you have a bit of a halo effect in terms of positive reinforcement. And with positive reinforcement, that halo effect is not so much restricted to the athlete and their performance, and it spills over into better performance in other areas, but also, in a certain degree, their performance becomes better, but also the people around them are influenced by that positive feedback. All of a sudden, you have an athlete who thinks more positive, has better or better self-actualization, has better or more positive voice in their head. Next thing you know, they like their teammates better. They like their teammates better. They get along with their teammates better. It creates better culture and better team cohesion. And they enjoy the actual experience of being on the team more than they did before when it was a punitive environment. The book notes this, and I commend them for this. They talk about, allied health professionals. They're more motivated and more effective when receiving positive feedback from supervisors. And, I work primarily in a medical-based environment where I work with people in skilled nursing, memory care, and then also individuals who are assisted living. And we have a team of nurses that work on each floor that work with the folks that live in our building. And, it rarely do I hear negative things come from our leadership down to the nursing staff. And I'm in nursing meetings. I'm in the stand-up meetings at work, called stand-up meetings at 10:30, where we talk about different cases. And it's never, ever have I heard negative feedback. It's always positive, in terms of how they work with their people, with the understanding that they probably hired the right people to be there in the first place. It's a different sidebar story. But I like this, how the book shines a light to that, and it's not just the athletic environment, but it's also the corporate environment or allied health professionals, where it says team approach and working with people. Okay. They have 4 broad categories for these effective reinforcers, and they're kind of dependent upon situation, time, and place. And quite frankly, with some of these, whether it's the social, the material, the activity, or special outings, they may not resonate or reach some of the athletes. You might have the best of intentions saying, here's a trophy or a great job, here's a t-shirt for being a great practice player this past week, and your athlete will be like, they'll shrug it off. It's no big deal to them. So it kind of depends on the culture you start to create on your team and what is or what has implied value uh, within the context of your group. You kind of create this little tribe, if you will, with your athletes, and you have this culture that's amongst the people within that tribe. And there are things that become of value to that population. And it's not going to be the same from team to team. It's not going to be the same from year to year, even if you're coaching the same dang sport. So you start to get a better understanding of what resonates with your athletes and actually what will have some kind of value to them. And as a result, then because of that value proposition, your athletes will respond to, hey, if you do this, this, and this, we'll end up having an activity after practice. We'll play sharks and minnows in the pool, if you swim all your laps under a certain time, which is a very common thing that's done with even high level swimming programs. They do fun stuff like that if their athletes can hit the times for when they're swimming. All right, so jumping into the next one. They talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. There's a little bit of a brief prelude to this in the chapter, but they really get into it on 132, and it's one of the main components of coaching. We start to understand your athletes and knowing what really drives your athlete. And what you find is with the intrinsic versus extrinsic, the intrinsic is like the internal driver to the athlete. It's what's going on inside of them. Extrinsic are rewards that are from the outside. Our goal as a coach to be able to understand what type of driver do you have that's from the athlete in front of you. Is it more intrinsic or extrinsic? Like some of the motivators we just saw in the previous slide, those are more extrinsic type of motivators. And there is a bit of a nature-nurture process with this. You have some athletes who are just naturally wired to be intrinsically motivated. They want to do better. They want to better themselves. And that's just how they've been made. That's kind of the nature side of it. You also have athletes who will come into your orbit where they've had coaches who, have done a fine job of being able to help athletes find and then refine that intrinsic motivation. Some athletes have never had any experience with that conversation at all. And they've been driven almost extrinsically by coaches. Okay, if we do this, we're going to get ice cream. If we do this, we won't run today. If we do this, these are extrinsic things that aren't really inherent to the athlete having a desire to do better. They're driven by an external party to motivate them. And you get better at picking out these things with your athletes. So I urge you to, as you're thinking through this, whether you're a teacher in an elementary school, you work with a team of accountants, or perhaps you coach a youth football team or youth basketball team, start to try to use some of these things to help you pick out the who's who and who you're dealing with. It'll definitely help you big picture, and it'll help you long term in being able to communicate with your athletes better, but also get better performance out of them. On to the next video.